On this episode of Putting Possibility into Practice, do you know who is protecting your data? You'll want to take note of some of the important questions you should consider when choosing an IT vendor and what you should look for in responses. Who's protecting your data? We can help on this episode of Putting Possibility into Practice, and it starts right now. I'm Joe Agostinelli, Social Media Manager here at Greenway Health, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, Putting Possibility into Practice. And you should by now recognize who my guest will be by his voice as he is joining us once again. He's Larry Whiteside, Greenway's Chief Information Security Officer, as we dive into the questions that you should be checking on when choosing an IT vendor for your practice. Larry, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's dive right into the questions and some of the things that folks should look for when they're choosing an IT vendor. And we'll have these questions in the description of the podcast also for you to refer to after you listen to this episode. But, obviously some of them, I guess people can say are common sense. We talk about, longevity of somebody being in the service and references, but a couple of the questions that we had talked about, is your business insured? Why a question like that if I'm choosing your company for, guarding my data?
That's a good question. So the reality is, in today's business environment, right, and especially in healthcare where we're heavily regulated, you've got to figure out where liability lies. Right, and because things are going to inevitably happen, right? We wish things were foolproof and that there was a guarantee. You're never going to have a hack or breach. You're never going to have systems fail. You're never going to have stuff happen. But we know that there's no 100%. So because things happen, you have to figure out how are you going to recoup your losses? Because if your technology systems go down and you have to shut down your office, you have to be out of business and not seeing patients for any amount of time, there's a cost that you as a business have to soak up associated with that. And the only way for you to be covered against the risk of it and to recoup any aspect of cost associated with it is through some sort of liability, right? Some sort of insurance coverage, right? It's the equivalent of driving cars. We've done this whole driving cars thing now for a number of decades, but most states have laws where you have to have some sort of insurance. And it's really to protect you as a consumer from the risk associated with the cost of an accident. And so we've got to sort of take that same mindset as it relates to technology and how dependent we as a society have become on the technology we use every day.
And another one I thought that was very interesting that folks may not think of right on the top of their mind is their in-house support. And if it's not, if the support isn't in-house, is it outsourced? And if it's outsourced, what do we mean by onshore or offshore?
So it has become a trend over the last decade for companies to utilize offshore, which means overseas help desk support. And it's not that it's a bad thing, but there tend to be a number of logistical issues associated with having an outsourced support function. Because then what happens is, in some instances you may have language barriers where even though the outsourced vendor speaks English, you still have some aspects of, because the dialect is still a little off, people don't necessarily understand. So if you're calling in to contact them about a specific issue, there tend to be issues in the translation of what the problem actually is that you're dealing with. Secondly, the support team's ability and knowledge and understanding of the specificities of the systems that you're running, because they're outsourced. If they're outsourced, that means they're typically outsourced by multiple firms. And so when you're calling in, you're getting a much less personalized conversation and interaction with the support rep, because they don't know much about your systems, they don't know much about your environment, they don't know much about anything related to what you're running, because they're just a third party that's handling the go-between of creating a ticket. And so what you're going to do, because they're working based off of volume, they're trying to just capture information and get you off the phone so they can move on to the next call. And so when you've got an in-source, one that a company that has their own support in-house, because they typically get educated on the systems of which they are responsible, or that the company that they work for is providing, they can give you a better level of first level support, right? Where they can answer some questions, where you may be able to get a direct answer from them for certain questions you have, versus always just opening a ticket.
And that kind of goes right into the next question is, obviously support would be one of the services included, or maybe not included, maybe there's an additional fee for it when you're choosing a vendor. But are there some types of services that folks should look for as to being pretty standard and included in offerings? And no one wants to be nickeled and dimed to death. What are folks looking for on the service front?
Yeah, so from a services standpoint, there's some very basic things that if you've got an outsourced vendor that is managing your technology environment, some basic things like data backups, right? It's a standard part of any technology support function that they should be doing, and they should be doing it well. They should be able to not only provide you an understanding of what the schedule looks like, how often are they doing fulls, how often are they doing incrementals, and how quickly a restore time would be if they have to bring it back up. Those are some things that you should have just as a basic part of it. A lot of companies, when they deal with the SMB market, the small to medium-sized businesses, they try and nickel and dime little things here and there where they want to offer some very basic services. And then when you start asking for other things that should be included as part of it, they begin to nickel and dime and add features on, which sometimes makes it more costly than it should be.
And one of the services you mentioned I was going to hit on next, because there's some subset of questions maybe you want to check on in regards to this, and that is, you mentioned backup services, and backup of data is so key these days. And first, let's talk about backup, and from a management and performance standpoint, why is it important to know who's performing and who's managing that backup?
Because at some point you're going to have to recover. I mean, at the end of the day, it really comes down to, at some point something's going to fail, and for one reason or another, you're going to have to depend on that data backup to actually recover a system. And when you have to go to it, if you have not tested it, if there's not some aspect of assurance that this backup is going to work, you can actually end up being out days worth of work or a data that could impact your business, right? If from our customer standpoint, what would the impact be if they were to lose a month worth of customer data, right? Their patient records for a month. That would be very, very impactful to the customers that they serve. And so having someone, a third party that gives you some assurance of how that's being done, how often that's being done, and some assurances that it works and they have the ability to recover to it, is extremely important just for the operation of your business.
And in regards, staying on the backup topic, and we've talked about this in past podcasts before, but a backup schedule, is there, the importance of finding out what that schedule is, and is there some type of industry standard, as for how often practices data should be backed up?
Yeah, so the industry standard has been to do a full backup weekly and then do incremental backups daily. That saves time, resources, and money from the standpoint of disk storage and the amount of time and the resources on the server itself when it's actually performing the data backups. And so doing it in that model is sort of what everybody has adopted historically over the last few decades. But it's just, I can't express how critically important it is, because if you think about scenarios like patching, right? One of the services I didn't mention when we said some basic services that should be included is patching and updating of servers. Microsoft comes out every month with new vulnerabilities and new things that they identify that need to be patched. And it's a well-known, common thing that everybody in the technology world is aware of, and you can plan around it. And there are some entities that I've actually seen that'll say, well, if you want us to actually patch your servers, we're going to charge you extra little fees. Well, with patching comes risk, because I've seen where patches cause disruptions in software and other components that you then may have to recover. And it's not that patching is bad. But because patching is a necessary evil of what we have to do when running technology systems, having those backups and having that data available so that if a patch that gets deployed causes a data corruption of any kind or causes some sort of issue, you've got your data readily available to be back up and recovered. And at the end of the day, it should theoretically be a trivial issue to recover from a data backup. But a lot of organizations try and make it a lot more costly and a lot more intricate than it should be.
And before we get into more on the recovery side of the data from a backup, talk a little bit about encryption and backups. Should they be encrypted, not encrypted, and why is that?
Yeah, so encrypted, the data being encrypted as part of the backup is extremely important because over the last decade, we've seen a number of breaches happen solely from backup tapes being lost. And from an industry standpoint, a large portion of the industry is still backing up to tapes. And because they're backing up to tapes or they're backing up to other disk drives, that data being encrypted in the event of it being lost in transfer or transit from one location to another, because a lot of people move tapes off-site into other storage locations because it's hard to store them in your data center where you've got limited space. And so in transit, those things have been lost now tons and tons and tons of times. And there are dozens and dozens of instances where organizations have had to report large data breaches simply because backup tapes were lost and those tapes were unencrypted. So it's become an easy practice. Almost every backup software has the capability to encrypt the backup data. So as it backs it up, it encrypts it at rest, whether it's on tape or whether it's on another disk, so that that data is in some secure mechanism in the event that it gets lost. And
another question, a service level agreement. What is a service level agreement and why is it necessary for recovery?
Yeah, so a service level agreement is really an agreement between you and that third party entity to help you understand what is the time frame of which they're going to bring you back to full operations. It's important for you as a business to know because it allows you to plan. Being able to plan on what is the longest expected time that as an organization I should expect to be out of business based on an event is important, because then it lets you have continuity of operations. It lets you understand how long is it possibly that I can be down and need to be utilizing paper processes because I'm going to be out with this system or another.
And 24/7 monitoring. I mean, obviously attackers can attack any day, any time of day, from just about anywhere. Is 24/7 monitoring an industry standard, or is it something people should check on?
So it's not an industry standard yet, but the reality is hackers don't sleep, right? I mean, some of the things they do are automated, but a lot of the things they do, they plan on people not having eyes on the screen, people not looking at and being alerted to things going on during off hours. When a practice shuts their door, when any business closes their door and goes home at night to rest, that doesn't mean hackers say, oh, their business hours are closed, so I won't bother them while they're not there. That's not what happens, right? So because they have a 24/7, 365 opportunity to attack systems, you've got to have 24/7, 365 ability to be alerted that things bad are going on against these systems.
And then probably the last question to keep in mind is, if there's a breach or security, why is it important to know, what the practice is responsible for, what the vendor is responsible for, and how it's going to be prevented from happening again down the road?
Yeah, so that's critically important because, again, healthcare being as regulated as it is, when these things happen, the practice is going to get bombarded with different inquiries, both from the media and from regulatory bodies, asking what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and what's going to happen to prevent it moving forward. So the practice needs to understand that. They need to understand where they're liable and what things are there in place that they should be doing. where their third-party vendor is liable and what are the things that they should be doing, and understanding how to prevent this. The worst thing you can do as an entity in healthcare is have the same thing happen multiple times and have not taken any action in between. Meaning, the federal government, right, they see hundreds, if not thousands of breaches, right, a quarter from different entities across the country. And for them, the most egregious ones are the ones where people are getting hit and being impacted by the exact same thing that they've already been impacted by once, and they haven't taken the appropriate actions. Because in most instances, regulators or someone will tell an entity, hey, here are things that you should do based on what happened. Here's some things to do going forward. And what's happened is the largest fines for small practices have come when those small practices have not heeded the words of the federal government or a third party who said, please ensure you start encrypting your emails. Stop using, open file shares. Stop using, unencrypted backup stores. Doing some very basic things like that. And so it's important to understand roles, responsibilities, liability, and where those things lie, so that when it happens, you can react faster. When it happens, you can respond faster. When it happens, you can ensure that everybody who's got certain aspects of responsibility are moving in accordance with each other.
And actually, your response there just made me think of something else. Checking on the tools and resources that a vendor has available for security to build and maintain and secure practices environment-wise. Important to check on that.
Yeah, that's an important part, because you want to know that they have and are doing something, right? And it's not just talk. It's not just a salesperson sold you and told you that they are the greatest thing since sliced bread, but you want some aspect of validation that the things they are doing, the things they told you that they are doing. Whether it's them giving you a list of capabilities that they have in their environment in the security landscape, whether it's them providing you reports, whether it's them just showing or demonstrating something that they're doing inside their environment to validate what the salesperson told you. Because nothing against salespeople, but at the end of the day, their job is to sell. And so there are times that salespeople will hype or overhype something that is being done in the environment that they are talking about based on the capability and service. Everybody thinks their thing is the best thing since sliced bread, right? So as a consumer, it is of any service, you've got sort of a due diligence to just verify and vet some of the things that are being told to you.
Great. Well, I thank Larry Whiteside Jr., my guest on today's podcast, as we talk about some of the questions that you should check on when choosing an IT vendor. Thank you for your time and great information.
No problem. Appreciate it.
And for more information on the products and services offered by Greenway Health and how we are protecting the data of our customers each and every day, you can visit our website at www.greenwayhealth.com. And I invite you to subscribe to our podcast on your platform of choice. We're on a number of them now. We're on iTunes. We're on Google Podcasts, Stitcher FM, FM Player, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Libsyn. I'm Joe Augustinelli, the social media manager for Greenway Health, and this has been another episode of our podcast, Putting Possibility into Practice. Thanks for listening.